The pain was a relentless shadow. It lived in her right leg, a deep, throbbing ache that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Elara dragged her heavy boot across the frost-covered dirt, the crisp scent of dying leaves filling her lungs. The deep woods of the northern border did not care about her shattered bones. The towering pines did not judge her clumsy, halting steps. Out here, hidden in the perpetual twilight of the forest, she was just another fragile creature trying to survive the coming winter. She had been living in this isolated cabin for 7 years, exiled, forgotten. For her own safety, her mother Maeve had told the Silver Moon Pack, the crisp mountain air will soothe her delicate condition. Her condition. The memory tasted like ash in Elara's mouth. The condition was a horrific fall from the high balcony of the pack house, a fall orchestrated by Maeve herself. Elara still remembered the sharp snap of her own bones, the paralyzing agony, and the cold, unfeeling stare of her mother looking down at her broken body. Elara had been a child. Now she was a 20-year-old woman whose existence was defined by dried herbs, bitter teas, and complete solitude. She was an omega, a cripple, a worthless burden. Maeve had branded those words into her mind so deeply they hurt more than the winter cold. A sudden noise shattered the heavy silence of the forest. Elara froze. It was not the rustle of a deer or the heavy thud of a bear. It was a whimper. Low, guttural, and trembling with a grief so profound, it made Elara's breath catch in her throat. Her hand instinctively drifted to the heavy wooden walking stick she used for support. The sound echoed again, much closer this time. It vibrated through the frozen earth, sending a shiver up her spine. Slowly, Elara limped toward the edge of her small clearing, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Emerging from the dense fog was a beast born of nightmares. It was a wolf, but its size was unnatural. Its shoulders were as high as her chest, its fur the color of absolute midnight. It moved with a heavy, uneven limp. But what drew Elara's gaze were its eyes. They were not the pale yellow of wild wolves. They were burning gold, brilliant, intelligent, and currently swimming in an ocean of despair. This was no ordinary animal. This was a shifter, a warrior from the deep north, terror sharp and icy spiked in Elara's veins. Shifters from the Iron Peak did not wander into this forgotten territory unless they were hunting. And their Alpha King Silas was a warlord whispered about only in terrified rumors. But the massive black wolf did not bare its fangs. It did not stalk her. Its heavy head was bowed low. Gently, with heartbreaking care, the beast opened its massive jaws and lowered a tiny bundle onto the frost-covered grass. It was a pup, a fragile ball of silver fur, completely motionless. The giant beast stepped back. It looked at the pup, then lifted its golden eyes to Elara. A low, vibrating whine tore from its chest. It was a plea, a desperate begging sound from a creature that looked capable of tearing down mountains. Elara dropped her walking stick. The heavy wood hit the dirt with a dull thud. Her fear melted away, instantly replaced by a deep, primal urge that bypassed all logic. Ignoring the violent protest of her ruined leg, she fell to her knees on the frozen ground. The cold seeped through her thin trousers, but she did not care. She reached out with trembling fingers. The pup was freezing. A deep, unnatural frost clung to its fur. Its tiny chest was completely still. There was no heartbeat, no breath, nothing. "Oh, sweet little one," Elara whispered, her voice cracking in the quiet woods. She looked up at the massive black wolf. The beast took a tentative step forward and pressed its giant snout against her shoulder. Its fur smelled of pine needles, dark earth, and fresh blood. But beneath the scent of the wild, Elara felt the same terrifying cold radiating from the adult wolf. It was a chilling frost that seemed to bite straight into her bones. The beast trusted her. It had crossed miles of hostile territory to find her. "You are a broken thing, Elara. You cannot even fix yourself." Her mother's cruel voice echoed in the back of her mind, a venomous whisper. No. Elara gritted her teeth. She refused to let the darkness win today. She closed her eyes and placed both palms gently over the pup's rigid ribs. She had no medical tools. She had no magic, or so she had been told her entire life. But she had a desperate, fierce desire to save this tiny life. She pushed past the paralyzing cold of the pup's body. She dug deep into her own soul, searching for anything she could give. She imagined a spark, a tiny defiant ember burning in the middle of a frozen wasteland. She did not use physical strength. She pushed her will, her useless love, and her overwhelming empathy straight down her arms and into her palms. A sudden strange sensation rushed through her blood. It was a quiet hum, starting from the center of her chest. It flowed down her arms like a stream of liquid sunlight. The frozen air around her hands seemed to waver. Heat, pure and absolute, gathered beneath her palms. It was not just body heat. It felt ancient. It felt powerful. The pup's tiny body jerked. Elara gasped, her eyes snapping open. She pressed harder, feeding that golden warmth into the little creature. The frost melting from its silver fur turning into droplets of water. Then came the sound. A weak, wet cough, followed immediately by a sharp, indignant squeal that pierced the quiet forest. The silver pup squirmed beneath her hands, its tiny chest heaving as it drew in a massive gulp of air. Its eyes were still closed tight, but its paws kicked weakly against her fingers. The giant black wolf let out a sound that was half bark, half sob. It lunged forward, nearly knocking Elara over, and began frantically licking the crying pup. The rough, wet tongue washed away the melting frost. Elara slumped back onto the frozen dirt, her chest heaving as if she had run 100 miles. Tears spilled over her cheeks, hot and fast. She had done it. She had pulled a life back from the edge of the void. The heavy, suffocating blanket of her own worthlessness cracked just a little. The massive beast nudged the squirming pup toward Elara's lap. She gathered the warm little body against her chest, wrapping her worn cloak around it. The pup rooted against her collarbone, its heartbeat a rapid, beautiful drum against her skin. But the giant wolf was not finished. It stepped back and looked deep into the dark tree line. Then it looked back at Elara. It took a few steps away, stopped, and turned its heavy head. The golden eyes locked onto hers with intense urgency. It wanted her to follow. Elara swallowed hard. Her leg was screaming in agony from kneeling on the frozen earth. The woods were dark and dangerous. But she looked down at the miracle breathing in her arms, and then up at the beast who had trusted her with it. Whoever this wolf belonged to, they were in terrible danger. "I am coming," Elara whispered, struggling to stand without her stick. "Let us go." The journey into the deeper woods was a nightmare of stumbling agony. The giant black wolf moved at a slow, deliberate pace, constantly checking over its massive shoulder to ensure Elara was still following. The forest floor was a treacherous maze of twisted roots and jagged rocks, hidden beneath a layer of slick, dead leaves. Every single step sent a fresh, blinding spike of pain shooting up from Elara's ruined hip. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood, using the copper warmth to keep herself from passing out. She clutched the tiny, squirming silver pup to her chest, holding it close to her throat. Its steady heartbeat and the soft warmth radiating from its small body became her anchor. It was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality, as the shadows of the ancient trees swallowed them whole. The beast led her to a steep, rocky incline, where the pines grew so thick they completely blocked out the gray afternoon sky. Hidden behind a massive fallen oak tree was the jagged mouth of a dark cave. Elara stopped her breath, misting violently in the air. A heavy, unnatural fog poured from the cave entrance. It was not the damp chill of the autumn woods. This was a biting soul, deep cold that instantly numbed her face and made her joints ache. A low, ragged sound drifted from the darkness inside. It was the sound of someone struggling for every single breath, a sound of immense suffering. The giant black wolf stopped at the entrance, pacing nervously. It let out a low whine, nudging Elara forward with its heavy snout. It could not go inside. The cold was too strong. Elara swallowed the lump of pure terror in her throat. She was a crippled, forgotten Omega from the Silver Moon Pack. What business did she have walking into the lair of a monster? But the tiny pup in her arms wriggled, letting out a soft squeak. "Stay here," Elara whispered to the massive wolf. She tightened her grip on the silver pup and forced her trembling legs to carry her into the pitch-black maw of the cave. The temperature plummeted the second she crossed the threshold. Ice crystals coated the stone walls, catching the faint gray light filtering in from outside. At the very back of the cavern, lying on a makeshift bed of thick animal furs, was a man. Even lying flat on his back, he was a mountain of a man. His shoulders were impossibly broad, shifting with tightly coiled muscle beneath his torn, blood-stained tunic. He possessed a harsh, striking face that looked as though it had been carved out of granite by a violent storm. His dark hair was matted with sweat and thick, unnatural frost. But it was his skin that made Elara freeze in horror. A web of creeping black veins looking exactly like frost spreading across a window pane, stretched violently across his chest and crawled up his thick neck. His lips had a terrifying blue tint. This was Silas, the Alpha King of the Iron Peak, the brutal conqueror of the northern mountains, the warlord everyone feared. And he was dying. As Elara took a hesitant step closer, the crunch of her boot on the icy stone echoed loudly. Silas snapped his eyes open. Elara gasped and took a step back. His eyes were not golden like his wolf. They were a piercing, merciless ice blue. They were the eyes of a predator, sharp and calculating, completely devoid of warmth. Even on the edge of death, the sheer crushing weight of his alpha aura slammed into her, making her knees buckle. "Who are you?" His voice was a harsh, scraping rasp, barely more than a whisper, yet it commanded absolute obedience. "I am Elara," she stammered, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "Your wolf! He brought me here!" Silas forced his heavy head to turn, his piercing gaze dropping to the bundle in her arms. The silver pup let out a soft yip. A violent flicker of raw emotion, absolute shock, mixed with desperate relief, shattered his cold mask for a fraction of a second. But it vanished, just as quickly replaced by a dark, deadly suspicion. That pup was dead. Silas hissed, his jaw clenching as a tremor of cold racked his massive frame. His lungs had stopped. "He is breathing now," Elara replied softly, taking a cautious step closer. Silas stared at her, his ice-blue eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. He was dissecting her. He was looking past her torn clothes, her messy hair, and her obvious physical weakness. He was the most powerful ruler in the shifter world. He had enemies hiding in every shadow. A strange woman appearing in his most vulnerable moment holding his miraculously revived heir was not a blessing in his eyes. It was a calculated threat. "You are a blood witch," Silas stated, his tone flat and accusatory. "Did the Southern Coven send you to finish the job?" Elara flinched as if he had struck her. A witch. An assassin. The idea was so absurd it would be funny if she were not absolutely terrified. She was the weakest member of her pack, a girl who could not even walk down a flight of stairs without a cane. "No," she said, her voice catching. "I do not know any magic. I am just a healer, and a very poor one. I do not even know what I did. I just wanted him to live." Silas did not believe her. The rigid lines of his face remained hostile. He was a king. Kings did not believe in coincidences. He saw her as an enemy waiting to strike. They were two broken souls, locked in a standoff. The feared tyrant who saw betrayal everywhere, and the abused Omega who believed she was entirely worthless. "Your wolf is freezing," Elara said quietly, changing the subject before his suspicion grew violent. The pup was freezing too. It is the exact same cold that is eating away at your chest, is it not? Silas gritted his teeth as another violent spasm shook his body. The black frosty veins on his neck pulsed with a sickening dark light. "What do you know of the death frost?" Silas demanded, attempting to push himself up onto his elbows. The effort was too much. He collapsed back onto the heavy furs with a low, agonizing groan. The scent of dark pine mixed heavily with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp, burning smell of ozone. "I know I can feel it," Elara said, taking another step closer until she was standing right beside his makeshift bed. "It feels like absolute winter has infected your blood. It feels like despair." Silas stared up at her. The war behind his eyes was painfully obvious. He was a man out of options. The death frost was a legendary curse. It had consumed his strongest warriors, and now it was claiming him. This strange, fragile girl in front of him was either his only salvation or his executioner. "Heal me," Silas commanded. The words were weak, but the alpha authority in his tone was undeniable. Elara hesitated, her heart hammering against her ribs. The arrogance of the man ordering her around while he was choking on his own frozen blood. "I do not know if I can." Elara whispered honestly. "What I did for the pup out there in the woods, I have never done anything like that before. I do not know how to control it." "Try." Silas growled, his chest heaving as the black veins crept higher toward his jawline. Elara looked down at this terrifying warlord. The stories painted him as a bloodthirsty monster. But right now, stripping away the titles and the fear, he was just a man, dying a very slow, agonizing death in a freezing cave. She gently knelt beside him on the icy stone. She placed the sleeping silver pup carefully into a warm fold of the animal furs next to Silas's shoulder. "I am not your enemy, Silas," Elara said softly. "Prove it," he rasped, his eyes sliding shut as the pain overwhelmed him. Elara took a deep, shuddering breath. She rubbed her palms together and reached out. She pressed both hands flat against his broad, muscular chest right over his heart, where the black veins were thickest and darkest. The physical shock of the cold nearly knocked her backward. It was 1,000 times more aggressive than the frost on the pup. It was a vicious, ancient magic. The cold slammed into her palms, instantly numbing her fingers and shooting violently up her arms. It felt like plunging her hands into a frozen lake. It was the feeling of life being violently extinguished. Elara gasped in pain and tried to yank her hands away. "Do not stop," Silas hissed through his teeth. "It is too strong." Elara cried out, tears of pain pricking her eyes. "It is tearing at my skin. You brought my heir back from the dead." Silas forced the words out, his jaw locked tight. "Do not tell me you are weak." His harsh words echoed the venom of her mother, but there was no mockery in his voice. There was a desperate challenge. He saw something in her that nobody, not even Elara herself, had ever seen. Elara looked down at her pale, trembling hands pressed against his scarred chest. She remembered the warmth she had summoned in the forest. It was buried deep inside her, locked away beneath years of abuse and forced submission. She gritted her teeth. She closed her eyes and refused to pull away. She leaned into the violent cold. She stopped fighting the physical pain and instead focused entirely on the faint, struggling rhythm of his heart buried beneath the ice. She imagined that golden spark again, the summer sun striking the frozen earth. She pushed. The black veins under her hands seemed to writhe and hiss, fighting back against her intrusion. The dark magic clawed at her mind, trying to drag her down into a lightless void. But Elara held her ground. She poured every ounce of her useless love, her hidden grief, and her desperate hope into her palms. Suddenly, the golden heat exploded from her core. It surged down her arms, a blazing river of liquid fire. The cave was bathed in a sudden, faint golden light emanating directly from her skin. Elara felt the heat crash into the death frost inside his chest. Silas let out a deep, echoing roar, his entire body arching off the floor. "Hold on to me!" Elara screamed over the sound of the magical rushing wind in the cave. Silas's massive hands shot out and gripped her forearms. His grip was bruising, desperate. As her golden energy flooded his system, the black veins violently receded, shrinking back from his neck down to his collarbone. The terrifying blue tint left his lips replaced by a flush of returning blood. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Elara's energy was draining at a terrifying speed. The cave spun around her. Her vision blurred at the edges, slowly turning gray. The pain in her hip flared into a raging bonfire. Just as she felt her consciousness slipping away, the ancient cold finally broke. It retreated deep into his chest, sullen and subdued. The brutal magical pressure in the air vanished. Elara collapsed forward, her body entirely spent. She fell across Silas's chest, her head resting near his beating heart. She was too exhausted to move, too weak to even lift her arms. Silas lay perfectly still beneath her. His breathing was no longer a ragged rasp, but a deep, steady rhythm. The terrifying cold radiating from his skin had lessened to a normal masculine warmth. Slowly, heavily, one of his massive hands moved from her forearm and gently settled on the center of her back. It was a gesture of protection, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible thing she had just done. Elara closed her eyes, the scent of dark pine wrapping around her like a blanket, and let the darkness take her. Time lost its meaning inside the icy cavern. The days blurred into a tense, quiet routine of survival. Elara would spend hours kneeling beside the makeshift bed of furs, pressing her hands against Silas's broad chest, pushing back the dark, encroaching frost. The rest of the time she foraged for dry wood at the cave entrance and tended to the silver pup. The pup was thriving. He was a vibrant, squirming ball of energy that brought a tiny spark of light into the dark stone room. Silas watched him constantly, his sharp blue eyes softening whenever the little wolf tumbled over his boots. But when Silas looked at Elara, his gaze was heavy and unreadable. He was a difficult patient. Whenever he was conscious, his alpha instincts flared. He hated being weak. He hated relying on a stranger. Most of all, he seemed intensely frustrated by the fact that he could not understand her. "Why are you still here?" Silas asked one late evening. His voice was stronger now, a deep, resonant rumble that vibrated against the cave walls. He was sitting up his broad back, resting against the cold stone. The black veins of the death frost had retreated completely beneath his skin, though the unnatural chill still lingered in his blood. Elara did not look up from the small fire she was carefully feeding with pine needles. "Your wolf brought me to you," Elara answered softly, blowing gently on the embers. "And the pup needs me." Silas let out a harsh breath. "My beast is a violent, territorial creature. It acts purely on primal instinct. Its instinct should have been to kill anyone who discovered my weakness. I am the Alpha King. My enemies would pay a fortune for the chance you have right now. So I will ask you again, why are you here? Maybe my instinct to save a life is simply stronger than your instinct to end one." Elara retorted her patience, wearing dangerously thin. The chronic pain in her shattered hip was a constant gnawing misery. Kneeling on the hard stone floor for days had agitated the old injury. Every movement was a sharp slice of agony. His relentless suspicion was exhausting. Silas studied her profile in the flickering firelight. He saw the way she shifted her weight to favor her left side. He saw the subtle grimace of pain she tried to hide every time she stood up. "You are not afraid of me." Silas noted the edge of suspicion leaving his voice. "I'm terrified of you," Elara admitted with absolute honesty. She dropped another branch into the fire and finally met his piercing, ice-blue gaze. "Everyone in the Northern Territories is terrified of you. They call you the Cold Ruler, the warlord of the Iron Peak. They say you have burned down entire villages for a single act of defiance. "And yet you stay," Silas said softly. "You sit in the freezing dirt. You tend to my air. You pour your own life force into my chest to keep the ancient curse at bay, even when it clearly hurts you to move. Why?" "Because no one deserves to die alone in the dark," Elara said, her voice dropping to a raw whisper. "Not even a warlord." The words hung in the heavy, smoky air between them. She had called him a warlord to his face. She had challenged the Alpha King. Silas did not roar in anger. His alpha aura did not flare to crush her into submission. He simply looked at her. A strange, completely unfamiliar expression crossed his harsh features. He shifted his massive frame, leaning closer to the fire. "Your leg," Silas rumbled, nodding toward her right hip. "It is completely shattered. It healed wrong." Elara looked away, shame burning hot in her cheeks. It was the ultimate mark of her worthlessness. "Yes," she whispered. "How did it happen?" he demanded. "It was an accident." Elara lied automatically, the ingrained fear of her mother taking over. Silas let out a low, vibrating growl. It was not a threat toward her. It was a sound of absolute disbelief. "Do not lie to me, Elara. I have broken enough bones on the battlefield to know the difference between a clumsy fall and a deliberate strike. Someone crushed your hip. Who did it?" The commanding alpha tone left no room for evasion. Elara swallowed hard, her fingers twisting the fabric of her torn cloak. "My mother Elara whispered into the silence of the cave. Her name is Maeve." Silas went perfectly still. His ice-blue eyes darkened into a terrifying stormy gray. "She said I was useless." Elara continued, the painful words spilling out before she could stop them. "She is a powerful healer in the Silver Moon Pack. She said the healing bloodline had skipped me. She said my weakness shamed our family. So she pushed me from the high balcony of the pack house. I was 10 years old. Then she exiled me to the border woods so she would not have to look at her mistake." The temperature in the cave suddenly spiked. It was not the biting cold of the death frost. It was a suffocating, blistering heat radiating directly from Silas. His jaw clenched so hard Elara heard his teeth grind. His massive hands curled into tight fists. The sheer violence rolling off him was terrifying. But for the very first time in her life, the violent rage was not directed at her. It was directed at the person who had hurt her. "Your mother is a fool," Silas stated. The words were simple spoken as an absolute, undeniable fact. Elara blinked, stunned. No one had ever defended her. No one had ever contradicted Maeve's cruel verdict. "She is a fool," Silas repeated, his voice vibrating with barely restrained fury. "Because you are the strongest creature I have ever met. You hold back a curse that has slaughtered the most powerful warriors in my kingdom. You brought the dead back to the waking world. You are not a mistake, Elara." Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. She fiercely blinked them away. That night, the ancient curse struck back. The death frost surged with a sudden, vicious intensity. Silas cried out in his sleep, his massive body racked with violent, agonizing tremors. The heavy furs covering him instantly froze solid. The air in the cave turned to bitter ice. Elara scrambled across the rocky floor, ignoring the screaming pain in her hip. She threw herself down beside him and slammed her bare hands flat against his chest. The cold was vicious. It was angry. It felt like a living entity trying to permanently claim his soul. It crawled up Elara's arms, biting into her skin like 1,000 icy needles. "No," Elara snarled at the unseen magic pouring every single drop of her golden energy into his freezing chest. "You will not take him from me. Do you hear me? You cannot have him." The battle raged for hours. Elara pushed until her head swam. The edges of her vision turned a fuzzy, dangerous gray. Her own life force was draining, rapidly spilling into him to replace what the frost was devouring. Just as she thought her heart was going to give out, the dark magic finally broke. It shattered beneath her golden heat, retreating deep into the shadows. Silas lay panting heavily, his skin slick with sweat that immediately began to freeze in the cold air. He reached out blindly, his massive calloused hand wrapped around Elara's slender wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Elara," he rasped, his chest heaving. "I am here," she whispered, her entire body trembling with absolute exhaustion. "I am right here. Do not leave me," Silas breathed. The words were not a royal command. They were a raw, vulnerable plea from a man who had spent his entire life fighting alone. Elara sank down onto the heavy furs beside him. She was too tired to sit up, too tired to move away. Her head naturally lulled against his broad shoulder. The terrifying chill of the curse was gone, replaced by the steady, comforting warmth of his body. "I will not leave you," Elara promised softly. She closed her eyes and instantly fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke up, the cave was bathed in the pale light of dawn. She felt a strange, heavy weight across her waist. Silas was leaning over her. He had pulled the thickest fur blanket over her shivering body during the night. His massive arm was draped protectively across her side. His ice-blue eyes were incredibly soft in the morning light. "I am sorry," Silas murmured, his voice a deep, soothing rumble near her ear. "For what?" Elara asked, her voice thick with sleep. "For looking at you and seeing an enemy," Silas said. He reached out slowly. He extended a single finger and gently traced the delicate line of her jaw. The moment his bare skin touched her cheek, the world stopped. It was not the shocking jolt of her healing magic. It was something entirely different. It was a spark, a brilliant electric current that shot directly from the point of contact straight into her heart. Elara gasped sharply, her eyes flying wide open. Silas froze, his pupils blowing wide until his eyes were almost entirely black. The air inside the cave completely changed. The smell of dust and smoke vanished. Suddenly, Elara was overwhelmed by the intoxicating scent of dark pine trees, fresh rain, and the sharp electric tang of ozone. It was the scent of a wild storm. It was the scent of the Alpha King. At the exact same moment, Silas inhaled sharply. His chest expanded as he caught her scent. The subtle fragrance of sweet vanilla, crushed wild herbs, and winter snow filled his lungs. His heart pounded, a heavy, frantic drumbeat that echoed loudly in the quiet cave. Elara felt her own heart suddenly skip a beat, completely changing its rhythm. It sped up, racing wildly, until it perfectly matched the exact, heavy thudding of his heart. Ba-thump, ba-thump, ba-thump. Two hearts beating as one. The realization hit them both with the force of a falling mountain. This was the mate bond. The legendary, unbreakable connection forged by the moon goddess herself. It was the purest, most terrifying magic in the shifter world. It tied two souls together for eternity. Silas stared down at the broken, exiled Omega lying in his arms. The fierce, possessive roar of his inner wolf echoed in his mind. Mine. She is mine. What is this? Elara breathed, her hands trembling as she brought them to her chest. This is impossible. I am broken. The mate bond does not choose worthless Omegas. Silas smoothly shifted his weight, hovering directly over her. He caged her between his massive arms, his face inches from hers. The alpha aura radiating from him was no longer terrifying. It was deeply protective, wrapping around her like a warm, heavy blanket. "You are not broken," Silas growled, his voice vibrating with absolute certainty. "You are perfect. You are the only one who could handle my beast. You are my fated mate, Elara. You are my Luna." Before Elara could process the impossible weight of his words, Silas leaned down. He captured her lips in a deep, desperate kiss. The bond exploded. A wave of pure, blinding heat rushed through Elara's veins. It washed over the constant agony in her hip, soothing the shattered bone and calming the angry nerves. It was a kiss of fire and claiming. She reached up, weaving her fingers into his dark hair, pulling the Alpha King closer, finally surrendering to the impossible dream. The kiss was a blinding revelation. It was the absolute end of her loneliness and the beginning of a terrifying new world. As Silas pulled away, his breath mingling with hers, Elara felt a profound shift deep within her chest. The heavy, suffocating darkness that had lived in her mind for 10 years finally cracked and shattered. The constant gnawing agony in her right hip faded to a dull, distant echo. The golden heat of their newly forged mate bond hummed beneath her skin, vibrating with the wild, possessive energy of the Alpha King. She belonged to him. He belonged to her. The universe had written their names together in the stars. Silas rested his forehead against hers. His massive chest heaved. He reached up his rough thumb, gently wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "You are my Luna," Silas murmured, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated straight through her bones. "I will tear down the entire Iron Peak and build it anew just for you. No one will ever hurt you again. I swear it on my beast." Elara closed her eyes, finally letting herself believe the impossible. She was safe. She was loved. But the universe was a cruel and jealous thing. The intoxicating scent of pine and vanilla was suddenly shattered by a vile, rancid odor. It smelled like rotting leaves, sulfur, and dark, stagnant water. Elara gasped, her eyes snapping open. Silas reacted instantly. The tender lover vanished, entirely replaced by the lethal warlord. He let out a deafening, earth-shattering roar. He shoved Elara behind him, using his massive body as a living shield. He crouched low to the cavern floor, his ice-blue eyes locking onto the dark entrance of the cave. His fangs fully descended, gleaming sharply in the dim light. Heavy, organized footsteps echoed on the stone. The sharp clinking of metal armor cut through the silence. Well, look what the filthy beast dragged into the dark." The voice was smooth, elegant, and entirely devoid of human warmth. It was a voice that had haunted Elara's worst nightmares since she was 10 years old. Elara's blood turned to absolute ice. Her newly healed heart seized violently in her chest. She peeked around Silas's broad shoulder, her entire body beginning to violently tremble. Standing at the entrance of the cave, flanked by 4 heavily armed rogue warriors, was Maeve. Her mother looked exactly as she always did, immaculate, regal. Her dark hair was braided tightly like a crown, her expensive fur cloak sweeping the icy floor. She stared at the makeshift bed at the Alpha King, and finally her cold, dead eyes landed on Elara. A twisted, venomous smile slowly stretched across her face. "I must say," Daughter Maeve purred, her voice dripping with cruel amusement, "I am genuinely impressed. I send you away to rot in the mud like the worthless cripple you are, and somehow you manage to ensnare the dying Alpha King. You always were more like a parasite than a wolf." Silas let out a feral snarl. He lunged forward, his massive claws extending. "Do not take another step," Silas Maeve warned sharply. She raised her hand. A pulse of violent, dark purple magic blasted from her palm. It slammed directly into Silas's chest. He was still weakened from his long battle with the Death Frost. The dark magic hit him like a physical battering ram, throwing his massive body backward. He crashed heavily into the stone wall with a sickening thud. Silas Elara screamed, rushing toward him. The rogue guards instantly surged forward, their heavy silver spears leveled directly at her throat. Elara froze her breath, catching as the sharp metal pricked her skin. "You will address me with respect," which Silas growled, struggling to push himself up from the icy floor. The alpha aura rolling off him was suffocating, trying to crush the guards into submission. "You are standing in my territory. She is my mate. She is your queen." His queen. The words hung heavily in the freezing air. Maeve threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It sounded like glass shattering on stone. Queen Maeve scoffed, taking a slow, arrogant step into the cave, Look at her, Silas. She is a broken, limping mistake. The frost must have rotted your brain. She did not heal you with love. She is a parasite. She manipulated you. She is more of a wolf than you will ever be." Silas spat back, pushing himself to his knees. "You broke her leg. You tortured a child." "Of course I broke her leg," Maeve stated plainly. She said it as casually as one might discuss the weather. There was no remorse, no guilt, only cold, calculating logic. Elara stared at her mother, her heart shattering all over again. Hearing the truth spoken aloud was a different kind of agony. Why Elara whispered tears, blurring her vision. "Why did you hate me so much? I did not hate you." Elara Maeve sighed, sounding bored. "You were simply a dangerous variable." The ancient prophecies of the Silver Moon spoke of a daughter, born with the true bloodline of the White Queen, a power capable of mending any wound and breaking any curse. I spent years studying the dark arts. I crafted the perfect weapon to control the northern packs. Maeve turned her cold eyes to Silas. The death frost Silas realized the horror dawning on his harsh face. "You cast the curse on my bloodline. You poisoned my warriors. I needed the Iron Peak, weakened," Maeve explained smoothly. "I needed the mighty Alpha King to bow to the Silver Moon Pack for a cure. I controlled your council. I controlled your trade routes. You were my dying puppet on the throne. But then my own pathetic daughter began to show signs of the White Queen's healing light. I could not risk her curing you and destroying my masterpiece. So you pushed me off the balcony." Elara breathed the absolute betrayal suffocating her. "You crippled me to hide my power. You exiled me so I could never fix what you broke." "It was necessary for the greater good of my ambition," Maeve said coldly. "But it seems fate has a twisted sense of humor. You found him anyway," Silas roared. The sheer violent fury of a fully awakened alpha shook the very foundations of the cave. The ground violently trembled. He ignored the spears pointed at his mate. He pushed off the wall, a blur of deadly muscle and rage aiming straight for Maeve's throat. But Maeve simply smiled. She reached into the folds of her thick cloak and pulled out a jagged black obsidian stone hanging from a heavy iron chain. It pulsed with a sickening, dark purple aura. "Look closely, daughter," Maeve hissed. She violently squeezed the black stone. A searing, blinding agony instantly tore through Elara's chest. It was not a physical strike. It was a psychic blade stabbing directly into her soul. Elara collapsed to the stone floor, screaming in pure, unadulterated torment. But the true horror was not her own pain. Through the newly forged, shimmering golden thread of their mate bond, Elara felt the magic travel. The artifact did not just hurt her. It used their sacred connection as a brutal conduit. Across the cave, Silas's violent charge was instantly cut short. He crashed to his knees, clutching his chest. A roar of absolute agony ripped from his throat. The pain hitting him was magnified 10 times over. The dark magic tore through the mate bond, violently attacking his already vulnerable heart. The black veins of the death frost instantly flared back to life on his neck, glowing with a toxic purple light. "Stop!" Elara begged, gasping for air as the pain crushed her lungs. "Please stop!" Maeve released her grip on the stone. The agony vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving both Elara and Silas panting heavily on the freezing floor. "The mate bond is a beautiful, fragile thing," Maeve mocked, walking slowly toward Elara. "It connects your souls. You feel his heartbeat. He feels your pain, which makes you the absolute perfect leash for a stubborn king." Silas spat a mouthful of dark blood onto the stone. "If you touch her again, I will tear your head from your shoulders." Maeve laughed. "If I touch her, you will die of cardiac arrest before you can take a single step. She is my prisoner now, and through her, you are my obedient dog." Maeve knelt down roughly, grabbing Elara by the chin, forcing her to look into her cold eyes. "Here is the reality of your situation." "Little bird," Maeve whispered, "you are going to stand up. You are going to walk out of this cave with me. You will return to the capital and sit at my side as my obedient, broken daughter. And as long as you do exactly what I say, the Alpha King gets to live." "No," Silas growled weakly, trying to crawl toward them. "Elara, do not listen to her. I would rather die. I will fight her." "If you fight, he dies, screaming," Maeve told Elara, ignoring the king. "I will crush this stone and let the dark magic tear his heart to bloody pieces through your bond. Decide right now, your freedom or his life." Elara looked past her mother's cruel face. She looked at Silas. He was the most terrifying warlord in the world. He was the cold ruler of the North. But looking at him right now, bleeding on the floor, fighting against dark magic just to reach her, he was simply her mate. He was the man who had looked at her shattered body and called her perfect. He had given her a few fleeting hours of true happiness. That was more than she had ever had in her entire life. It was an easy choice. "I will go with you," Elara whispered, her voice completely hollow. "Just let him live." "No!" Silas roared. His eyes were wild with desperation. "Elara, please, do not leave me in the dark. I have to." "Silas," she sobbed, forcing herself to stand up. The pain in her hip was back, a violent reminder of her reality. "I am sorry." The rogue guards grabbed Elara by both arms. Their grips were brutal, bruising her pale skin. They began to drag her forcefully toward the cave entrance. Every single step away from Silas felt like tearing a muscle from the bone. The mate bond violently stretched, humming with terrible vibrating anxiety. The physical distance was absolute agony. Elara felt Silas's raw despair echoing in her own chest, a heavy, suffocating wave of grief. She looked back over her shoulder one last time. The giant black wolf was nowhere to be seen, likely sealed away by Maeve's dark magic. Silas was left kneeling in the dirt, screaming her name until his voice broke. The heavy, dark fog of the forest swallowed them whole. Elara was locked in a cold iron cage mounted on a carriage. As the wheels began to turn, taking her away from the only light she had ever known, she clutched the heavy iron chain around her neck. Her mother had won. The White Queen was a prisoner, and the Alpha King was broken once again. The gilded cage was located at the very top of the highest spire in the Silver Moonpack capital. The walls were constructed of pale, smooth stone. The heavy curtains were spun from the finest blue silk. A massive fireplace roared in the corner, throwing desperate dancing shadows across the extravagant room. But to Elara, it was simply a tomb with a better view. She sat perfectly still on the edge of the massive canopy bed. Her right leg hung uselessly toward the floor, the deep ache settling deep into her bone marrow. But the physical pain of her shattered hip was absolutely nothing compared to the violent torment raging inside her chest. The mate bond. It was supposed to be a source of infinite strength, a sacred connection weaving two souls together with a thread of pure golden light. But Maeve had twisted it into an instrument of horrific torture. Elara closed her eyes and focused inward. She could see the bond in her mind. It was a shimmering, heavy cord stretching out from the center of her heart, reaching far across the frozen mountains to find Silas. But the golden light was currently stained with toxic, pulsing streaks of dark purple magic. She felt him. She felt every single agonizing beat of his heart. Silas was fighting. She could feel his wild, feral rage echoing through the connection. He was a warlord. He was an Alpha King. Surrender was not in his blood. He was constantly slamming his immense willpower against the dark magic trying to break through the distance to reach her. And every single time he fought back, Maeve punished him. Elara gasped violently, clutching her chest as a sudden, sickening wave of absolute agony washed over her. It was sharp and relentless like a jagged blade dragging across her ribs. She fell forward, her forehead pressing against the cold silk bedsheets. She did not scream. She had learned over the past 3 days that screaming only made Maeve smile. Through the bond, Elara heard the phantom echo of a deep, rumbling roar of pain. Silas. He was suffering. He was being slowly torn apart from the inside out, and she was the conduit. The heavy oak door to her chamber clicked open. Elara slowly pushed herself upright. She forced her face into a blank, emotionless mask. She refused to give her mother the satisfaction of seeing her tears. Maeve glided into the room. She wore a stunning gown of dark emerald velvet, the black obsidian stone resting heavily against her collarbone. She looked every inch the powerful, untouchable ruler she believed herself to be. "You look pale." "Daughter." Maeve observed her voice a smooth, venomous purr. "You must eat. We have a grand banquet tomorrow evening. The entire council will be in attendance. You will sit at my right hand and show them that the rebellious little cripple has finally learned her place. I will not be your puppet." Elara whispered, her voice raw and hoarse. Maeve let out a soft, mocking sigh. She reached up and lazily ran a perfectly manicured finger over the jagged surface of the dark stone. Instantly, a brutal spike of dark magic shot through the room. Elara was thrown off the bed. She crashed heavily onto the hard marble floor. Her ruined hip absorbed the impact, sending a blinding flash of white-hot agony straight into her brain. But the pain in her chest was infinitely worse. Her heart seized violently. She curled into a tight ball on the floor, gasping desperately for air that simply would not enter her lungs. Across the mountains, she felt Silas drop to his knees. The overwhelming wave of his physical torment washed over her, suffocating her with his pain. "Stop fighting me," Elara Maeve commanded coldly, looking down at her writhing daughter. "The Alpha King is a stubborn beast. He keeps trying to channel his power through the bond to heal you. It is quite pathetic, really. He drains his own life force just to send you a little warmth, and every time he does, I squeeze the leash." Maeve turned and walked toward the door. "Remember your place, little bird," Maeve threw over her shoulder. "If you misbehave tomorrow, I will let the dark magic consume his heart entirely. You will feel him die." The heavy door slammed shut. The locking mechanism clicked loudly into place. Elara lay on the cold marble floor for a very long time. The sharp spikes of dark magic eventually faded into a dull, continuous throb. She slowly pushed herself up into a sitting position. She leaned her back against the side of the bed, pulling her knees tightly to her chest. She was trapped. If she fought, Silas suffered. If she tried to escape, Silas died. Her mother held the ultimate trump card. As long as the mate bond existed, Silas was a prisoner to Maeve's dark artifact. Elara closed her eyes and reached out through the shimmering thread. "Silas," she whispered into the empty room. Instantly she felt a response. It was not words. It was a feeling. A deep, rushing wave of desperate love, fierce protection, and profound sorrow. The scent of dark pine and ozone faintly ghosted across her senses. Even in his own unimaginable torment, his only thought was of her. He was trying to comfort her. Tears finally broke free. They tracked silently down her pale cheeks, dropping onto her torn dress. He was a king. He was meant to rule the northern peaks. He was meant to run wild and free beneath the winter moon. He was not meant to be chained by dark magic, because he had the terrible misfortune of falling in love with a broken Omega. He is suffering because of me. Elara realized the thought landing like a heavy stone in her stomach. I am his weakness. Her mother had called the bond a leash, and Maeve was right. The sacred connection was the only thing giving the dark magic a bridge into Silas's heart. There was only one way to save him. She had to sever the leash. The thought sent a violent tremor of pure, primal terror through Elara's entire body. To break a fated mate bond was considered the ultimate taboo in the shifter world. It went against the very laws of nature. It was an act of extreme violence against the soul. For a strong, healthy alpha, it meant a lifetime of agonizing emptiness and madness. For a weak, physically fragile Omega, It meant absolute, certain death. The shock of the severing would stop her heart entirely. It was a death sentence. But as Elara sat on the cold floor of her gilded cage, she did not feel fear. She felt a strange, profound sense of peace settling over her mind. Her entire life had been defined by pain. She had been tossed away. She had been told she was worthless. But in that freezing cave, the Alpha King had looked at her and seen a queen. He had given her a reason to live. Now it was her turn to give him his life back. "I choose you," Silas, Elara whispered fiercely into the darkness. "I choose your freedom. I choose your life over my own." She took a deep, shuddering breath. She closed her eyes and focused entirely on her chest. She found the thick, shimmering golden cord of their mate bond. It was beautiful. It was the best thing that had ever happened to her. And she was going to destroy it. Elara reached out with her mind and violently grasped the golden thread. She did not push her golden healing magic into it. Healing would only strengthen the connection. Instead, she pulled. She pulled with every ounce of willpower she possessed. She pulled with the desperate strength of a woman who had absolutely nothing left to lose. The pain was immediate and catastrophic. It was 1,000 times worse than her mother's dark magic. It was 1,000 times worse than the day her hip was shattered. It felt as if she had reached directly into her own chest and grabbed her beating heart with bare hands, slowly trying to rip it completely out of her ribcage. A blood-curdling scream tore from Elara's throat, echoing loudly off the stone walls of the tower. Through the bond, she felt Silas instantly panic. He felt her intention. He felt her pulling away. No. A phantom roar echoed in her mind, heavy with absolute terror. "Elara, stop. Do not do this, please. I can take the pain. I can take anything. Just stay with me." "I love you," Elara sent the thought rushing down the golden thread. "Be free, my king." She gritted her teeth and pulled harder. The golden thread began to stretch. It vibrated with a sickening, high-pitched frequency. The dark purple magic clinging to it hissed and spat violently. The physical toll on Elara's body was immense. Blood began to drip slowly from her nose. Her vision went entirely black. The room spun wildly out of control. Her ruined body was shutting down rapidly under the immense, unnatural strain of rejecting her other half. But she refused to let go. She imagined his face. She imagined his sharp, ice-blue eyes. She imagined the giant black wolf running freely through the snow-covered pines, completely untethered, completely wild. With one final desperate scream of pure agony, Elara ripped the bond apart. The sound it made was not physical. It was a deafening spiritual crack that vibrated through the very fabric of the universe. The heavy golden cord violently snapped in two. The backlash was explosive. Elara was thrown violently backward. Her head struck the heavy wooden leg of the bed. All the air vanished from her lungs. Her heart gave one final, violently erratic flutter, and then simply stopped beating. Absolute darkness rushed in to claim her. The pain vanished. The cold vanished. Everything was finally quiet. Across the world, the dark magic leash shattered into 1,000,000 useless pieces. The Alpha King was suddenly violently free, but in the gilded cage at the top of the tower, the broken Omega lay perfectly still on the cold marble floor. She had made the ultimate sacrifice. She had traded her fragile life for his. However, the universe was not finished with Elara yet. As her physical heart stopped, the violent shockwave of the severed bond crashed directly into the deepest, most hidden part of her soul. It crashed into the ancient suppressed power that Maeve had tried so desperately to keep locked away. The true bloodline of the Silver Moon did not respond to ambition. It did not respond to dark magic. It responded to absolute selfless sacrifice. Deep within the lightless void of Elara's dying body, a single, tiny spark ignited. It was not the warm, golden heat she had used to heal Silas. This was something entirely different. This was pure, blinding white light. It was the color of a winter star. It was the color of ancient, untamed divinity. The spark flared. It rapidly expanded, violently consuming the darkness. Elara's motionless chest suddenly jerked upward. A massive, rushing breath of air forcefully re-entered her lungs. Her eyes snapped open. They were no longer the soft, frightened eyes of an abused Omega. They were glowing. A brilliant, terrifying, incandescent white. The White Queen had awakened. The white light did not burn. It was absolute, freezing purity. It flooded Elara's veins, replacing her slow, fading pulse with the rushing force of a winter avalanche. She felt the exact moment the ancient power reached her shattered right hip. A loud, sharp crack echoed in the silent room. Elara gasped, but it was not from agony. It was the breathtaking sensation of a decade of suffering being instantly, completely undone. The jagged, ruined bones shifted and seamlessly knitted together. The torn ligaments snapped tightly back into their rightful place. The scarred, atrophied muscle smoothed out, filling with vibrant, unstoppable strength. She placed her bare foot flat against the cold marble floor. She slowly pushed herself up. She stood perfectly straight. There was no limp. There was no pain. There was absolutely no weakness left in her body. She looked down at her hands. They were radiating a soft, blinding white aura. The legendary power of the White Queen, hidden and suppressed for generations by her mother's cruelty, was finally unleashed. But she was not truly whole. Half of her soul was still missing. Elara closed her glowing white eyes. She reached out into the empty, aching void where her mate bond had been violently severed. She did not search for the frayed golden thread. She simply created a new one. A blazing, unbreakable chain of pure white light erupted from her chest. It tore through the fabric of space, racing faster than sound across the frozen mountains toward the Iron Peak. It slammed directly into Silas's heart. Through the newly forged connection, Elara felt the Alpha King roar. It was not a roar of pain. It was a deafening roar of absolute, terrifying, resurrected power. The brilliant white light flooded his veins, completely incinerating the very last lingering traces of the death frost. The dark magic was not just pushed back, it was entirely eradicated. Elara opened her eyes. The incandescent white glow faded to a faint, beautiful shimmer in her silver irises. He was coming for her. And she had a pack to reclaim. Down in the grand hall of the Silver Moon Pack, the heavy chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over the assembled council members. The long wooden tables were piled high with roasted meats and expensive wine. Maeve sat at the head of the main table, her dark emerald gown perfectly arranged. She was raising a silver goblet, preparing to deliver a speech about pack unity and her absolute control over the Northern Territories. A massive, deafening crash shattered the elegant atmosphere. The heavy reinforced oak doors of the grand hall did not just open, they were violently blown off their iron hinges. The heavy wood splintered and smashed into the stone floor, sending a cloud of dust and terror through the room. The entire council leaped to their feet, drawing their ceremonial daggers. Standing in the ruined doorway was Elara. She was no longer the broken, limping girl dressed in forest rags. She wore the simple, torn blue silk dress from her prison tower, but she wore it like royal armor. She stood tall, her spine perfectly straight, her right leg firmly planted on the stone. A terrifying, beautiful white light gently pulsed beneath her skin. The room fell into a stunned, breathless silence. The elders stared at her straight leg. They stared at the undeniable ancient aura of the White Queen radiating from her very soul. "What is the meaning of this?" Maeve shrieked, her perfect composure finally shattering. "Guards! Seize her immediately! She is using dark illusions!" The pack guards hesitated. The primal instincts of their inner wolves were screaming at them to drop to their knees and expose their throats to the ancient power standing in the doorway. "I am not an illusion, Mother," Elara said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried a strange, echoing resonance that vibrated in the chest of every single wolf in the room. "I am the truth you tried to break." Maeve's face contorted into an ugly mask of pure rage. She reached violently for the black obsidian stone resting against her collarbone. "I will rip your heart out right in front of them," Maeve snarled, squeezing the dark artifact. But nothing happened. There was no surge of purple magic. There was no pain. Elara simply tilted her head, watching her mother desperately crush the useless stone. "You cannot use the bond as a leash anymore," Maeve Elara stated calmly, "because my mate is no longer your prisoner." A violent, freezing wind suddenly tore through the shattered doorway, extinguishing half the candles in the grand hall. The heavy scent of dark pine, fresh snow, and ozone flooded the room, instantly suffocating everyone with its sheer, crushing weight. Silas stepped out of the shadows. The Alpha King of the Iron Peak had arrived. He was fully shifted into his half-wolf warrior form, massive claws extended from his hands. His ice-blue eyes burned with lethal, unhinged fury. The terrifying black veins on his chest were completely gone, replaced by a faint, pulsing white glow, where Elara's new bond anchored directly to his heart. Behind him stood 50 of the most brutal, heavily armored warriors of the northern mountains. Silas locked eyes with Maeve. The warlord smiled. It was a terrifying, blood-curdling sight. "You touched my Luna," Silas rumbled, his deep voice shaking the glass in the window panes. Maeve stumbled backward, her face draining of all color. She looked wildly at the council members, but they were already backing away from her in absolute horror. The dark magic she had used to silently compel their loyalty for years was currently burning away under the cleansing light of the White Queen. The truth was finally laid bare. The elders suddenly remembered the missing funds, the strange sicknesses, the suspicious deaths of anyone who had ever opposed Maeve's rule. She crippled her own daughter to steal the throne, an elder whispered loudly in the silent hall. "Take her," Silas commanded his warriors, not taking his eyes off the trembling woman. "Throw her in the deepest, darkest pit of the Iron Peak Mountains. Let her rot in the cold she tried to curse me with." Maeve screamed curses and threats as two massive northern warriors grabbed her arms and dragged her roughly out of the hall. Her reign of terror was over. The poison had been violently extracted from the pack. The grand hall was completely silent, save for the heavy breathing of the terrified council. They slowly turned their eyes back to the broken girl they had exiled to the woods. Silas shifted back to his human form. The lethal warlord vanished. He walked slowly across the stone floor, ignoring the entire room until he stopped directly in front of Elara. He looked down at her straight leg. He looked up at her glowing, beautiful eyes. "You saved me," Silas whispered, lifting his massive hand to gently cup her cheek. "You shattered your own soul to set me free." "I would do it 1,000 times over," Elara replied softly, leaning into his warm touch. Silas suddenly stepped back. Right in front of the entire Silver Moon Council, the most feared Alpha King in the world dropped slowly to one knee. He bowed his head, submitting entirely to the woman standing before him. The entire room gasped in shock. Alpha Kings bowed to absolutely no one. "You are my fated mate," Silas declared, his voice echoing with absolute devotion. "You are the White Queen of the North. You are my equal in every single way. The Iron Peak and the Silver Moon are yours to command." Elara looked down at the massive, powerful man kneeling at her feet. She looked at the council members who had once whispered that she was a worthless burden. Slowly, as one synchronized body, every single elder guard and warrior in the Grand Hall dropped to their knees, bowing their heads to the floor. The broken Omega was dead. Elara took Silas's hand and pulled him back up to his feet. She intertwined her fingers tightly with his. The physical pain was gone. The endless fear was gone. As she looked out over her kneeling subjects, feeling the steady, powerful heartbeat of the Alpha King rushing through her own veins, Elara finally knew what it meant to be unbroken. She was home. and she was ready to rule.